Thank you so much for coming. We want to talk today about political Islam and the importance of us having a method in our heads of how we assess and look at Islamist movements. Of course, the thing is we're always first struck by is the way in which Muslims or Islam or Islamism is presented in the media and presented to us. And I think the kind of most obvious example we can talk at the moment is Priti Patel, who's a foreign secretary, refusing to rescue the children of ISIS members who are stranded in Syria. In other words, so evil is Islamist ideas that even the 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds will carry it. And the extent of the atmosphere of Islamophobia and hatred of anything Muslim or Islamic, to the extent that we are prepared to abandon essentially British kids to a really quite horrible fate in detention camps inside of Syria. That is the extent to which it has become acceptable to be anti-Muslim or Islamist, is that it covers not only those involved, but their children, obviously. And you really get that sense. Behind that, there are kind of two views which I think are important for us to understand. So the dominant view that Islam is a backward religion. It harks back to a backward era. Quite often you get Islam followed by medieval. It's a medieval kind of thing. And what we have is a backward-looking movement faced by what we have in the West, which is a kind of modern or modernist or modernity, or however you want to place that. And the difference between the two is that we've developed through Enlightenment and so on, and they remain stuck in the Middle Ages. Never mind that this is just weird for someone coming from the Arab world, because for Middle Ages in the West meant an era of barbarism and and really quite idiotic backwardness, whereas actually the height of Islamic culture that period. But leaving that aside, and then there's the other aspect of it, which is, so this is from the right, so we expect this from the right. It's just backward. The best thing to do is to smash it. Even their children are not acceptable. Even the innocent themselves are no longer innocent if they've been touched by political Islam or Islamic fundamentalists. And then there's the left. When I talk the left, I mean in very broad terms, talk about kind of liberal left and some sections of the left that simply see Islamism as some kind of fascism. It's a deeply reactionary movement, and quite rightly they'll point out to Islamic attitudes towards sexuality, towards women, and so on, to show that this is actually an extraordinarily backward movement, to the extent sections of the left describing Islamism as a form of fascism, Islamofascism. And of course, this is very crucial in the kind of popular perception of, if this is fascism, then we ally ourselves with whoever we need to, with Churchill if necessary, in order to smash fascism. So what you get is that if there's a fight between an Islamist organization, say in Algeria, and the state, even though the state's a dictatorship, we will always support the state because the state is more modern and the Islamists are more backwards. So you get all these kind of things. And then obviously, this is a big danger, and one we need to kind of address and think about. It's the flip side of that, which is Islamist organizations. We won't even call them Islamists. Let's just call them by the name Hamas, Hezbollah, so on. These are anti-imperialist movements, progressive. Therefore, everything they do, because they stand up to imperialism, must be okay. Everything Hezbollah does, we agree with 100%. So you get both these flip sides, if you like. One, it's Islamic fascism. The other, it's the most progressive thing around. And I want to say that these are very dangerous. Both are very dangerous for us on the left. We expect the right to do this, so let's not worry too much about that. But for us, on the left, especially the revolutionary left, and especially the revolutionary left in the Middle East or in the Muslim world, these are actually really, really crucial that we understand and look and use the tools of Marxism, if you like, to understand, break down and understand our relationship towards Islamist organizations and knowing the difference between one type and the other, and how they work out. The first thing I want to say, and really, this might, I don't know, maybe I'm underestimating or overestimating people, but Islamism, as we know it today, is a modern movement. This is not an old movement. This is not a section of society harking back to what it was like before the locomotive and the automobile arrived. This is a very modern movement that emerged out of the traumatic experience of capitalism and colonialism. This is very, very crucial. So It isn't like when you talk about like the Muslim Brotherhood, it isn't an organization that can trace its roots back to like the 14th or 15th century or the 10th century or whatever. It actually emerged at a period of severe crisis inside of Egyptian society. And it's the same with the Islamist movements everywhere else. And there's quite a few kind of examples of it. The most obvious one is with the introduction of capitalism, so colonialism, but also capitalism widely, you had a massive disruption of the old order. What were old feudal orders, or in the case of the Ottoman Empire, a kind of feudal state feudal system and so on, in which the religion was quite dominant, and in which you had the arrival of foreign capital, usually European, French and British and Italian in this period, that just came in and smashed everything. And you got that section of the population that says, if you like, they've destroyed our old society, they've thrown everything into trauma and so on. What we need is a return to what we had before. And we'll call this, for want of shorthand, the Islamism of the old exploiter, of the feudal lord. The ones in which, especially with Sunni Islam, that everything is as it should be, that the world is in order. And what has happened is that outsiders have come through and have destroyed that order, and what we need is a return to that order. But of course, what that actually means is a return to the feudal relations that were quite dominant in the Arab world, in the 19th century, early 20th century. And then we have the Islamism. So we can describe it. It's old-fashioned, the old emir kind of Islamism, traditionalism, and so on. Which everything was set as it is. Anything coming through is kind of disrupting it. We need to return to that period of history. So this is, if you like, Islamism of the old exploiters. Then we have the Islamism of the new exploiters. This is really best way to look at this is the difference between the first kind of major king of Saudi Arabia, Fahd, in the 1930s, and the king of Saudi Arabia now, the prince. I was going to say psychopathic prince, but that is probably actually not a bad way of looking at him. So the modern prince, if you like, of Saudi Arabia. And you see, if you just simply look at it and you go, the difference between one and another is one's the great-grandson of the other. But we have to understand the massive difference between the Islamism of early Saudi Arabia, which was about destroying the old Ottoman Empire, which was considered to be corrupt, which is about return to kind of a sense of, tribal purity and so on. In a massive desert, you can kind of do this. So we can have that. And you can have the Americans come in the 1930s and say to Fahd, here's $30,000, give us rights to your oil. And Fahd, being a very clever man, says, make sure it's in gold, because I won't accept cash. So this was, if you like, the early Islamist rulers, in which they were simply gave their country and its resources over to international capitalism, and they got a tiny portion of money, although it seemed a lot of $30,000 in cash was a lot of money in them days, unlike now, obviously. Between that and now, and Saudi prince now, who has probably control of a wealth fund that's bigger than the British economy. And when we talk about Saudi oil production today, we talk about it being, the Aramco, Arab American Oil Company, which is Saudi-owned, is the richest company in the world. And Saudi money is vastly different. And the role it plays in capital, as part of international capital today, is vastly different to what it was like in the 1930s. A huge difference. What's happened in that time, even though the Islamism, Wahhabism, quite strict puritanical Islam of Saudi state originates in the old order, it is then adapted to a completely different changing circumstances. The country I was born in, Qatar, when I was born in the early 1960s, I was born at home because really there was very little sort of modern hospitals or anything like that. And the Qatar of today, which is extraordinarily rich. And when you talk about the emirs and so on, not simply amassing huge amounts of oil wealth, but also a large chunk of Apple, control a large chunk of capital. Saudi wealth fund, $5-6 trillion they have to spend. So you get a sense in which this is, if you like, the Islamism of the new exploiters, of the new class. And this doesn't simply just stop at, the Saudis building mosques across the Arab world. We had it the same with Islamism of Assad, Bashar Assad, who's dictator presently in Syria. Him and his father, even though they are from a nationalist tradition. The Ba'athist is a secular nationalist tradition. The party they come from built more mosques than the entire work of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an underground organization. Actually, Saddam Hussein built more mosques, even though, again, this is supposed to be a secular system, because Islamism adapted as a way in which to frame the argument between East and West, in which to tie people together. And it's quite crude, to be honest with you, a lot of this stuff. So first they accept modernity as being, no veil and all this kind of stuff, as we had in Turkey. And then suddenly it becomes, when the regime comes under pressure, suddenly they start talking about cultural imperialism, rock and roll music. Death metal was a big one in Egypt. Actually, it's I hate death metal. I don't want to insult anyone here. But in Egypt, it's seen as a revolutionary act because it's seen as satanic music. So a lot of the revolutionaries listen to death metal. But you get that sense in which cultural things become kind of quite crucial. So we can have supposedly left-wing or secular regimes suddenly standing up, denouncing the cultural imposition of the West because it's destroying our fabric, our social way of life, and so on. So this becomes then the language, if you like, the language of it. So this is the Islamism of the new exploiters. And then we have the Islamism of the poor, which is a very different thing completely. And really my experience of this is simply seeing the transformation of Lebanon from when I was young, which was 75% of people were rural, lived in villages, and over the period of my lifetime till today, where it's 90% of people live in the cities. So that transformation, that movement from the countryside to the cities was a traumatic movement, because what you had was the old agricultural systems collapsing, capitalism now beginning to take over huge tracts of land, driving the old peasants off the land, and so on. These people, some of them can become landowners, some of them do slip away and become landowners and so on and join the new middle classes. The vast majority find themselves pretty much destitute and begin to congregate in the ring, what we call the belts of misery around the major cities. And so I guess the best way to explain this in terms of Lebanon was the impact of the Israeli occupation of the south of Lebanon, which is majority Shia Muslim population, over the course of since 1981, 1978 actually, more and more waves of people have been fleeing, both the fact that the old orders were collapsing, the old village guarantees of village life sort of were collapsing, but also accelerated by the fact that you had the Israelis constantly invading. Where do these people end up? These people end up in the slums south of Beirut, just outside of Beirut, and they join the ones who came before. So to the north of Beirut are the Armenian slums, because these were people who escaped the Turkish genocide, almost 100 years ago now. This is where they settled. To the Kurds, which, again, similar thing. So these belts, if you like, become the belts of misery, extraordinarily poor. And inside of these, they also bring the structure, because of the chaos of city life, they bring the networks and structure of the village with them, and with them the ideas. And you see this, I guess, clearest with the development of Hezbollah. So Hezbollah emerges after 1982, after the defeat of the left by the Israelis. It has one rule. The majority of the Shia in Hezbollah are from the south. It has one rule, which is you cannot join the organization, you can only join as a family. So if we were to make, let's say we were all related, if we were going to become a unit of the resistance against the Israelis, no one else can join our unit, only family members. This is actually really useful because it kept out any spies and so on, was much tighter, but it also then brought with it that structure of the village, of the paterfamilia, the patriarchal, if you like, structure. So that gets recreated inside of cities. And I can talk about that in terms of Hezbollah and Shia, from what you call Shia Islamism, but we can also talk about that with any other form, any other form. And so this becomes, if you like, the anger, if you like. And if the only text really, the vast majority of people of this generation would have come across would have been the Quran, then if you make a reference to the Quran, same way we in the West will make a reference to the Bibles about rich men not going through the eye of needle and so on, you'll find text inside of the Quran which attacks those who live off the earnings of others, who attacks the fact that rich people should be paying a tax. It attacks the fact that lots of mosques, for example, wouldn't allow the homeless into their door, through their doors at night. They'd throw them out. So all these things then become, if you like, a radicalized anger about the hypocrisy within the set of ideas, within Muslim thought. And then, of course, we have the Islamism of the new middle classes, and the kind of most obvious kind of section of those. There's two examples I want to give. One are what we call the Bazaris of Tehran and Iran, who during the Iranian Revolution, 1979 revolution, joined the revolution, but they are small-scale merchants. Why did they join the revolution? Because with the arrival of sort of imperial capital inside of Iran, there were sections of Iranian society that essentially grabbed monopoly over trade. And for them, it was about breaking this monopoly, about allowing them to also a right to become wealthy. And so it becomes, if you like, this kind of driving force. And obviously, what really helps is that if your ruling regime, which happened to be a monarchy at the time, was fully backed by the US, and it's very easy then to pick up the fact that this is US dominating, distorting Iranian society. What we need is a return to, et cetera, and so on. So we have to understand religious ideas in those terms, in their class basis and in their interpretation. That's, to be honest, all religious ideas you have to understand. You actually have to understand very much in those terms. So we have kind of a multi-class reaction. Lots of the time maybe using the same language, but actually what comes out of it and the tensions inside of the Islamist movement becomes really important for us then as revolutionaries to understand and make an assessment of organizations as they arise. And the most important one really for us is to see and understand Islamist movements as social movements in which are trapped. So the social movement which says Mubarak regime or Sisi, let's come really up to date. It's a toy of the West. Who disagrees with that? No one disagrees with this. He's like, they love him. The IMF, through the World Bank, through the Trump, through to everyone. He is selling our country, the Ummah, the people, the nation, if you like, as defined in kind of Islamic ideas. And so therefore it's the duty of Muslims to rebel against the infidel, i.e. foreign capital, and to replace it with something that serves the people. So, I mean, this is it's kind of very much its broad way, and in its broad explanation. And in Egypt, when you look at that, you can see the kind of forces at play. But really, when you look at South Lebanon or you look at Palestine, actually see it in a much more concentrated, concentrated way. One of the hardest arguments, really the hardest argument, and still a really hard argument, you have with a lot of Palestinians, especially in the camps in Beirut, when you're having an argument about the compromises Hamas, for example, are making, just, detailed politics that we talk about, they see the left, especially the Western left, as being utterly useless and betraying them. And we see this, the way in which, best way to put it, was a guy asked me from the Labour Party to join the Labour Party. I said, yeah, I'll join immediately. He was really pleased. And it was quickly followed by victory to the Palestinians, after which then I expelled myself. It's actually not even allowed to raise the question of Palestine without being called anti-Semitic. That the first thing they drop when under pressure is the question of the Palestinians. How does that play on the streets? We can't trust them. Actually, we have to look towards ourselves, etc. So this is actually quite a strong. This is quite strong. And in Lebanon itself, sections of the left, for example, aligning themselves with what they consider to be the modernist capitalist parties against Hezbollah and the Islamists, are seen simply then as a secular justification for the attack on the Palestinians, the attack on the resistance, which of course, this is exactly what it is. I have 5 minutes. Sorry, I'm on page 4. Okay. So it's really important now. I can do the rest. This is really crucial. So we understand it in terms of in which the ideas can come from, in which the traditional ideas are then used to express something new. So that the slogan of Hezbollah, for example, was all the way through since their inception was, we are, as the Quran says, always with the oppressed, always against the oppressor. That's very really useful. So when questions, especially 10, 15 years ago, you ask Hezbollah officials and so on questions about, say, Chile, they say, oh, we're with the Chilean people, we're with the oppressed against, what's happening in Russia, we're with the Russian people and the oppressed against. So you can understand that how within these ideas they can then even be international and begin to see not the splitting of the world between religions, but between those who are oppressed and those who are the oppressor. And as Muslims, we always stand with the oppressed and so on. So you really see how those ideas go. And I think that's really important. But then there's a second element to it, which I'll try and do in the next 4 minutes, which is also really crucial, which is you have then the flip side of that. Well, if Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Qaeda or whoever are fighting imperialism, then they are a progressive force, because imperialism is the thing destroying the Middle East. Therefore, those taking arms up against it, irrespective of what they say or how they describe themselves, are anti-imperialist forces. Anti-imperialist, therefore, means progressive. To that point, we agree with them. We will stand with Hezbollah, Hamas, against, or anyone, to be honest with you, against any kind of oppression. But we don't do the second bit. And the second bit is, therefore, everything they do is progressive. And you say, okay, well, how does it play out? Because how does it play out, for example, in Syria, where you have a mass uprising? This mass uprising draws everyone in from across different communal divides, sects, and so on. And it threatens the relationship, the position of Iran in the region. Iran goes to Hezbollah, says, never mind that you are the most important resistance organization in the Middle East. Now we need you to destroy these Sunni cities. And you see then at that point in which we all went in the Arab world, no, what the hell do you think you're doing? You're a resistance organization. You're not a tool of a state to defend one family. This is how the argument went. Instead, what we got was Hezbollah, the progressives, therefore, Daraa or Homs or Hama or Deir ez-Zayt or any of these places are in the tools or playing into the tools of the Americans. Therefore, we have to support the resistance against the revolution. And you saw it a couple of weeks ago in Beirut. Huge demonstrations take place. They're across all communities. They appear in Christian areas and Sunni areas and Shia areas and so on. And what we had, who were the organization that came through to try and smash up these demonstrations? It was Hezbollah's street thugs. So you get Hezbollah street thugs attacking their own people in their poor areas, in their heartlands, because these people are now going outside the bounds of what is acceptable for Hezbollah. And what's acceptable for Hezbollah is that we remain within the system as it exists. We're not against the Lebanese sectarian system. We are for a larger portion of it. So you see in the way in which then anti-imperialist organizations, if we're not careful, we can see them simply as being totally progressive or simply as being totally regressive, but actually understanding their split in between. They represent, at certain points, different forces and different classes. They have expressions to different things, and there is a limit to where they go. And the limit of Islamism is always the limit of the state, the limit of the nation, even though sometimes you get different kind of language. That is, for the Muslim Brotherhood, the biggest, most important. It is about displacing the top pro-Sisi acolytes who are millionaires with Muslim Brotherhood acolytes who are millionaires. So you replace top levels of the class with your section of the class. But at the same time, you then attempt to, because you have a base amongst the poor, to try and improve their conditions as best you can. And this is what we had in Egypt after 2011 revolution up until Sisi's coup. Inability, on the one hand, everyone's looking at them going, why are they just removing one rich person and sticking another rich person in? And on the other hand, unable to take the revolution any further, which is, for it to succeed, we'll have to destroy the whole structure of Egyptian state and Egyptian capitalism, unwilling to do that. Therefore, it gets stuck in the middle. It's unable to express really what the interests people put in them, and at the same time then becomes a restraint on the movement, after which then along comes a counter-revolution, smashes the Muslim Brotherhood, and to be honest with you, absolutely honest with you, very few people came out to support them. It was actually a bit of a tragedy. And it's precisely these things, and I will finish in 1 minute, it's precisely these things that we have to understand when we look at Islamist movement. It's not simply about the ideas. It's the class pushing these ideas. It's how these ideas are used to express anger, frustration, or whatever. So we make these assessments. We look at the class base of it. Is it a small organization? Is it a tiny... So we have lots of tiny Islamist organizations in Lebanon of 15, 20 people who make a lot, who will commit massacres and so on, very different to one which is tens of thousands, sometimes 100,000 strong. So we always look at the difference between the two. And we always understand that Islamist organizations always face then the other problem. And we see this both with Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, and I will finish on this, which is they start from, actually, especially Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, start from a very puritanical position. As soon as it becomes a mass movement, suddenly finds itself having to make compromises. And I'll give you an example with Hezbollah, and then with Al-Qaeda. The compromise with Hezbollah is how they dealt with sexual health in their community. When the question of AIDS starts surfacing in a really big way inside of Lebanon, what does Hezbollah do? It can't simply declare no one has sex outside of marriage, etc., etc. What it does is it goes to some of the most progressive organizations in Lebanon, the feminist movement, those dealing with safe sex and so on, and recruits them to help take the message into their community. And you think, well, this is not Islamism. No, it's not. This is Hezbollah attempting to adapt. Actually, suddenly you have real world problems you have to deal with. They start having to make those compromises down to the same level, how they have to deal with electricity generating, how you treat the water, what happens to women who are being beaten up at home, what's happening in this factory. It becomes suddenly in the real world, and that pure position begins to disappear. Now, you see this more starkly with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda starts off as a really harsh, very traditional, very strict Islamist organization, loses quite badly in Iraq on the hands of the Americans and so on. Its extremism causes a reaction amongst the resistance itself that hands them over to the Americans, and is totally destroyed. So when Al-Qaeda then moves into Syria, it has a very different outlook. So in Iraq, it saw itself as being against everyone. In Syria, it puts itself very firmly on the side of the revolution. What does that mean? That means Al-Qaeda in Syria saw the overthrow of the regime as part of what it did. That means it had to make alliances with everyone in it. It then splits between that element that says we have to change the way in which we deal with the masses of people, and the old Al-Qaeda, now described as the Islamic State, which then does that thing that Al-Qaeda used to do, being very puritanical, extraordinarily harsh, and now you see the same process taking place with ISIS. And I'll finish on this. If we understand the contradictions, if we don't fall into the idea that somehow there's something intrinsically progressive about the Western religion as against the Eastern religion, maybe the way the sun falls in the sky or something, some kind of mystical thing, if we understand ideas in their social context, and we understand the way these ideas are used by different classes inside of a particular situation. So this is the crucial element. We neither describe them as fascist, nor as reactionary, nor do we paint them simply as being progressives and anti-imperialist, but a result of the crisis of capitalism inside of the crisis of society and the way in which in which they react to it.